Great. I want to welcome everyone to our presentation. I want to welcome Willie Bryan and Prince Solace, our guests from the Justice League of Greater Lansing. Edgewood has been working on anti-racism issues for the last 7 years and deepening our anti-racism commitments through programs and by developing community relationships and partnerships. And our racial justice ministry team has really been the lead in that. And one of the things that has grown out of those community partnerships is a relationship with the Justice League of Greater Lansing. And it's been a really awesome opportunity to partner with other congregations in the Lansing area as we begin to study reparations, not just nationally, but what are the implications for practice of reparations here in our community, and why should predominantly white faith communities be engaging this conversations, but also these practices of reparations. So I want to introduce Heidi Thornley, who is one of our co-chairs of our racial justice ministry team and has been one of those people that has been just foundational in building our community relationships.
Thanks, Liz. Okay. In May 2021, All Saints contacted Edgewood to discuss reparations in the East Lansing area. Kathy Floor and I, as racial justice co-chairs, answered that call. And at the initial meeting were Janet Chegwin, Dustin Petty, Pastor Kit Carlson from All Saints, Willie Bryan, a friend from Action of Greater Lansing, and All Saints First Presbyterian, Kathy Floor and I. As we discussed and brainstormed how faith groups locally might approach reparations, Willie mentioned an idea, a broad idea, a great idea, and it was a vision, a real vision. Another meeting was set, research was done, ideas compiled. Willie and Dustin worked together and made a white paper, created a white paper that sort of outlined the Justice League of Greater Lansing, or gave them a mini framework, I guess. That August, Willie connected that faith group with another faith group from First Presbyterian of Holt, working on racial justice, and connections broadened. Work continued, working committees formed, events were held, faith groups and leaders of Black and white congregations gave input, communities, groups also gave input about things throughout the Greater Lansing area. So this all joined into an effort of the Justice League of Greater Lansing, Michigan. It's a model giving faith communities and churches a way to move forward, repairing the breach. I am blessed to be part of this, and I'm excited that we at Edgewood have the opportunity to continue our history of faith-based social justice action in the Lansing area. It is real. I'm really very happy that Willie Bryan, the founder of the Justice League, and Prince Solace, the president of the Justice League, are here with us today. And Willie, are you going to begin?
All right. Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. I am prepared to do the let me get my screen share. Prepared to do a presentation, and I want to just go right into it. So thank you for having the Justice League come and share with you again. And we want to make sure that we keep Edgewood as a partner, and we appreciate the work and the welcome that we have received from Edgewood, and it's been really a great relationship. Heidi and Kathy have just been invaluable. Kathy is taken the mantle and just sped us along with her expertise, and it's just been a great relationship. So we're happy to be here. And can everyone see this? Okay. You're seeing the point presentation. All right. Let's see. Let's make it a little larger, and we'll just move right along here. All right. So Heidi gave you the background, great background, because Heidi was there from the beginning, and she has this just down pat, and I'm grateful to her and Kathy for the partnership. So we talked about it as Heidi mentioned, developing a reparations plan, and we just went full speed ahead and did that. So what I want to do is talk about that plan and how we have gone forward with it. We generally do a historical background, talk about why reparations are needed, and that leads us to the racial wealth gap, and we'll speak about that. And then we want to talk about what can we do about it. So hence solutions. And then we'll have a presentation on the model itself. So what are reparations? Reparations have been used to make amends for historical wrong. Reparations come from the word repair. So if there are historical wrongs, especially by governments that have been done, a way to repair that is a reparations plan. And that's where we wanted to lead this talk to. I'd like to talk about a couple of examples of reparations, say, if the U.S. government had been involved. And this is an example used here in Michigan. And I like this one because it brings it home to folks. And so in 1986, there was a grant given to the Ottawa tribe of Michigan of $32 million. And the background on that is that in 1836, the Ottawa tribe ceded land to Michigan, and it's approximately 40% of the current land mass that Michigan has right now. It's about 14 million acres of land was ceded. And if you look at the date, we're talking about 1836, and we know what happened in 1837, right? 1837, Michigan becomes a state. And the importance here is that Michigan would not have become a state without this land mass that we're looking here in yellow, Upper Peninsula, Lower Peninsula. Michigan did not have the land mass, and the Ottawa tribe provided that. So the problem, why there was reparations made, was that the tribe initially said, we want to use the land. That's fine. You can take it. That's great. We just want to be able to hunt, fish, recreate on it. And initially there was an agreement. But after about a year, as we know happened often, the Ottawa were not welcomed on the land anymore. In fact, they would be put off the land. So that became an ongoing argument that the U.S. reneged on the agreement to allow them to use the land, and the Ottawa considered it reciprocal. It really wasn't, as far as the government was concerned. So that argument continued and ended in 1986 of a grant to settle the ongoing dispute. Reparations is that's what reparations are. And we know the reparations to Japanese citizens by the U.S. The Japanese citizens in the U.S. during World War II were interned in camps, internment camps. So everybody knows that story pretty much. And the government formally apologized. This was done through the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. This was promoted in the 70s by Japanese citizens, and it ended in each citizen that was interned being given $20,000, and the U.S. government formally apologized. Reparations again. So we have the background for reparations. So then we come to this project asking the question, are reparations for African Americans warranted? So the main question that we go to and that needs to be answered is, why? we know that the Japanese were interned and the Ottawa land was taken. So what is the reason that African Americans need reparations? So we're going to talk about some elements here. And what I want you to do is think of those as impediments to wealth accumulation. Because what the eventual outcome is the disparity between wealth for African Americans or any other group in the country, especially white Americans, but certainly the gap between them. So let's keep that in mind as we look at the impediments to wealth accumulation. Slavery, Homestead Act. So we're going to talk about these, and we'll do it fairly briefly on some of these. GI Bill, the sharecropping piece, Jim Crow laws, redlining, and the last one we'll talk about would be mass incarceration. So, we like to start with slavery because it is America's original sin, and the reason that this subject continues to be on our radar. It continues 400 years of that history in this country. 246 of those where people were actually enslaved. The rest of that's been the aftermath of that. So the wealth of the U.S. was in fact built on slavery. I always talk about the fact that the cotton ushered in the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution is the basis of the riches that the U.S. enjoys. So emancipation was eventually came to fruition, right? After 246 years of enslavement. Abraham Lincoln, of course, was the president, and he tried to do compensation because at the end of the Civil War, it was freedom for all. But was there any compensation for the free labor that had been provided for those 246 years to this country? So Abraham Lincoln in 1865 did allocate 400,000 acres along the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And this, of course, was land that was owned by the Confederacy, Confederates that separated from the U.S. So each free person was assigned 40 acres. And this picture represents folk coming to get that dispensation of 40 acres. They could farm it, they could work it, live on it, build a house on it. And this was a derivation of the 40 acres and a mule that you have heard in the culture since Reconstruction. And the problem with this, again, when we talk about impediments, that means that this could have been a piece that would have made it all equal. Everybody's got some land, everybody can work it, you can do what you want. So that would have been like, yeah, now we can move toward equality. What happened? In the fall of 1865, we know President Lincoln was gone. He'd been assassinated in April. Andrew Johnson, who was his successor, overturned the order and put folk off the land. Took it back. That now we're back to no compensation. Another impediment that these are large pieces. Now, we could double this number in the kinds of impediments in the number, but these are some of the more egregious ones that we like to talk about, that it presents, so that you have a good understanding of why wealth didn't follow Black people. There were two Homestead Acts. This was the westward expansion. We all know about it. It's been popularized on television even. But the two Homestead Acts. In 1862, Black people were not available because they were enslaved at that point. So there was a second Homestead Act. And this was land on the west, the westward expansion, where we didn't have populations of course, the U.S. had been settled along the East Coast. So going west, in 1866, we had the Southern Homestead Act, and there were like 246 million acres of Western land that was freely given. There were no questions asked, except you make an application, you farm the land and improve the land, stay on it 5 years, improve it. At the end of that point, you'd be given a land patent for the land. And so the impediment that we see is that Black people didn't get the land in the kind of numbers that white people did. And we know at this point, you can easily guess what the impediments to Black people getting land would be. This was 1866. Folk were just being given their freedom. And during slavery, it was against the law to teach Black people to read and write. So making an application would be difficult. So I think there was a nominal application fee. I mean, at least I know there was a nominal application fee, about $20. $20 would have been difficult to acquire. So at the end of the period, about 1.6 million white families got land. Only about 4,000 or 5,000 African Americans received final land patents. So there were Black people who did go west, did get some final land patents. Now, there's a caveat to this. Even 4,000 or 5,000 people getting final land patents, they didn't always end up staying on the land for their 5 years. Or even if they got the patent, they still had trouble holding on to the land. So they would be, there was, if they got it, that's one situation. If they staying on the land for the 5 years became a real problem. I mean, because of the racism involved, many times people were encouraged, and forced off the land. So the bottom line was that this was land that became ancestral land, became family property that you could pass on, you could sell and give the money to your family, whatever the end game for land ownership was not available to Black people. So families being able to pass this on and inherit it made white families have ancestral wealth, whereas there was an impediment for Black people doing that. Sharecropping, this was a huge piece in American history, and sharecropping lasted from just after Reconstruction, or just after Reconstruction, on for another 100 years. So in the 1960s and 70s, you could locate folks still doing sharecropping, but the height of that would have been the 30s, 40s, 50s. But sharecropping was that unfair system of landowners sharing their land with white landowners, sharing their land with Black farmers. And ideally, that would have been a 60-40 sharing. You do work the land, the Black farmers work the land, and you would have been able to amass wealth by working the land and sharing the profits from the harvest. That didn't happen very often. So this was another brutal system of white people becoming wealthy and Black people becoming poorer because they did not get the proceeds. I mean, it was just a brutal system. The landowners they knew they could discriminate. And so at the end of the crop season, when time came to share, they would just simply say, I'm not going to share with you this time because you don't have any. In fact, you owe me because I let you stay in my house. So, all kinds of nefarious reasons to not actually share the profits on the land. I'll just give you a quick example here. My parents were sharecroppers. My father managed to get out of that, my family managed to get out of that sharecropping system. And My father was able to save enough money by selling seeds from the cotton the crops that he participated in. And he saved enough money to build a house. The house that you see behind me is one I grew up in. This house is in disrepair now, so it's not as well kept. But this is where I grew up. The house below it that you see represents the house that the white landowner could build and his family could grow up in. So that gives you an example of the disparities that we know were experienced. Jim Crow laws, another brutal system, and this was a system that was sanctioned by governments. I mean, all of the pieces we're talking about were actually sanctioned by the government, in that it was either inaction or it was direct action. This direct action here, where there was a system of laws and executive orders that legalized discrimination, so that African Americans were not allowed full participation in the society. Jobs were not freely allowed. Black people were not freely allowed to have jobs that made fair wages, and just the whole 9 yards. This is just an example you're looking at of separate water fountains, separate waiting rooms, separate theaters, separate rides on the bus. I mean, we know the whole story. And all of that marginalized the community. So again, an impediment to folk being able to advance. The GI Bill. We know that story more and more. We know it. I've talked to many people who say to me, "I didn't know that existed." This was everybody knows about the GI Bill. This was after World War II. Veterans coming home. And there were Black and white veterans, right? And the GI Bill was passed in 44 to be able to allow veterans returning to get loans for education, building homes, whatever was needed. And it was really, it's a sort of reparations piece. If you actually think about it that way, it did allow it. The problem with it is that Black returning soldiers were not given the same treatment. They were, for a myriad of reasons. Sometimes Black veterans had been dishonorably discharged, and that happened disproportionately to Black veterans. The other thing is that the government just allowed the states to dispense the loans, and therefore states, especially the southern states, the previous Confederates, were very, very unfair with the practices of giving veterans loans. So you got a result like in 1947, only 2 of 3,200 VA loans were in Mississippi. 13 Mississippi cities were given to Black borrowers. 2. The North didn't fare a lot better, right? The statistic of New York and New Jersey getting fewer than 100 of the mortgages going to Black people. This is where I talk about Levittown, and I think most people know about Levittown. I'll just do a brief description here. Levittown was the rise of suburbia, and so Levitt was this is named after the builders. Levittown named the builders William Levitt and his brother, and they built these homes in developments. And you can see this picture it's a good representation of what suburbia looks like. And so the homes were built, they were turnkey, you could walk right in, they were furnished, there was no problem when they were built. They were sold for $7,000 to about $9,000. They had loans, but William Levitt said, "I am not selling my house to Black people. Nope, not going to do it." And the government allowed him to do that. So a development like this wouldn't have Black people in it. These houses now owned by, huge numbers of people able to do that. They were owned by white people. So they could pass these homes on. Today, these homes will be worth $300,000 to $500,000. And you may know someone. You may know someone who's inherited. You may have inherited one of these homes. But I know my ancestors were not in these homes, and I wouldn't be in that category of being able to inherit a $500,000 house now. And I have met folk who have and recognize that they have benefited from a system that Black people were not able to participate in. Redlining, another egregious piece. I know you probably recognize this. This is Lansing, and this is East Lansing. You can see my cursor, I believe. This is Michigan State here. You know the story here. The government was initiating this redlining, and so real estate developers and mortgage lenders made these maps to show where they wanted to sell land to and encourage people to build homes in. And the red areas were considered poor. They call it hazardous. These were undesirable areas that they might, that would be identified, and Black people would be encouraged to purchase homes here or build homes in these areas. The green areas are areas, an example here is, this is Moores River the subdivision here. And this is Michigan Avenue here. This is Martin Luther King here. So you can see what the pattern looks like. And if you do an overlay of a current map, so this map was made in 1934, and these patterns were set. And these patterns have rarely changed. And so therefore, Black people have been marginalized in these groups. I mean, there's environmental injustice going on, just all kinds of problems here. The other piece over here is that this is East Lansing. And Edgewood, I know, is very familiar with this pattern here, because what's different? This area here and the Lansing area. There are no red zoned areas. That meaning that there were no Black people able to buy homes in East Lansing or build a home. And I know that Edgewood's been involved in a lot of this. That's why I say that it's very familiar to you, because until 1968, Black people were not allowed to buy or build homes here in this area. The key to remembering is, to this area, is that it set the pattern. It made it so that folk in these marginalized areas were continuously discriminated against. They were continuously marginalized, and that pattern continues today. So that, the aftermath is here, what we're talking about. This is the aftermath. And we see that to change it, cover the deeds that folk have, the language, covenant language in those deeds for homes in these areas, say that you won't sell this. Not only will we not sell it to Black people, but don't sell it. When you sell it, don't sell it to Black people. Make sure we keep this segregated. Make sure we continue this horrible system. So, an impediment there. Mass incarceration is the last one I'll mention. I'll just quickly say that we know we have the highest incarcerated population in the world, and disproportionately, that population is Black and brown. Our last census, 2020, we show that 14% of the country's population are African American. Prison population, you know, if it mirrored the general population, would be 14%, or about. The prison population for African Americans is 40%. If you add brown people in, Black and brown people make up close to 60% of the inhabitants in prisons today. All of those pieces we just discussed have created a racial wealth divide. And that's the reason we're here, the reason we talk about this plan. We've come to find that through these methods, through those impediments we talked about, it's created a huge racial wealth divide. I like to show this because this graphic here can kind of explain it pretty well. So what has happened over the period since 1866, and of course before, because folk were enslaved, the wealth accumulation has not happened for Black people. If we look at this, all of the people in the country, this is median household wealth. You know, having gotten a house in the 40s and 50s through the VA loans, or through the Homestead Act in 1866. So the total for, just look at, this is over a 30-year period. So we just look at 2016 in total of all people in the country, it's about $81,000, $82,000 per household. If you divide that out and look at white families' wealth, you're talking nearly $150,000, and I've seen figures where it is higher even. For Black families, that figure drops dramatically. It's $3,500 of wealth that you and your ancestors have accumulated. And that's because of the impediments that we talked about. The same thing can show for Latinos. Let's look at this one, because this kind of explains, as we talk about the amount of that Black people is the only group that started out in this country with zero wealth. And if we look at that pattern today, we look at all of the population. 21% of all of the population had zero wealth. When we divide it out, when we look at white populations, it's about 15.5%. This is for 2016, again, over 30 years. And then for Black families, it's twice that amount, over twice that amount. It's 37,000. It's a little bit different for the Latino population. But zero wealth means you have no money. You lose your job, you sleep in your car or on the streets the next week. It literally means you can't go to grandma and say, listen, I know you got some money tucked away. How about, letting me, give me a down payment on a house? You don't have that option when you have zero wealth. All right, so those are the facts and those are the stats. And what we want to talk about is, how can we fix that? And then how can we even start to fix that? I mean, where is such a huge problem? Where could we start? So obviously the best place to start would be what the government has done before, reparations. The government could do reparation for African Americans in this country. That has not happened. There have been, many desires and proposals for that to happen, but it has not. One of the more popular ones, and it's a bill introduced by John Conyers from Michigan. We all know who that is. John introduced it in 1989, and he reintroduced it every year for 30 years, for the 30 years he was in Congress. And it never this is important. It never left committee. John was in the House Ways and Means Committee. It never left the committee. John died in 2019, and it was picked up by Sheila Jackson Lee from Texas, and she got it introduced and reintroduced, and in 21, the bill did pass. I'm sorry, the bill did leave committee and got to the floor of the House. But unfortunately, that's where it still is. So we don't have that option. So do we sit on our hands, or do we wish, or do we cry? Do we say it's awful and I'm sorry, or do we do something? And that's what the Justice League proposes, is that we do something. The Justice League of Greater Lansing, Michigan. And I believe Prince would be ready to come in here and give us a quick, I don't know how far we are in, explanation of what the Justice League is proposing. Is that right, Prince?
That's right, Willie. Thank you.
Want me to keep this one up and you?
Yeah, I think we'll just work with this one instead of doing
All
the
right.
transition. Okay. So just to kind of recap before we move forward, it was legal to uphold unjust laws, and it benefited this country greatly to uphold those unjust laws. And I think, you know, when the majority of people are involved in an unjust law or an unjust system, it's hard to combat. And there's only one thing that alleviates us from that, and that is the truth, right? No matter how ugly it is. And so the Justice League is looking at the truth of the legacy of slavery and its aftermath in this country. We're focused on repairing the breach. And there is a scripture that deeply resonates with the work that we've been doing for the past year and a half. And it's Isaiah 58:12. It states, "Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to live in." So there has been a national movement toward reparations. Keep in mind that we are trying to breathe new life into a 400-year-old broken promise, right? Reparations, or the idea of reparations, as Willie clearly stated, did not start with the Justice League. Nonetheless, we're working on this local model to have it have actionable items. So March 22nd of 2021, Evanston, Illinois became the first U.S. city to make reparations available to its Black residents for past discrimination and the lingering effects of slavery. Next, it goes into how the city council came together to make that decision.
I'm sorry, I was moving ahead, and I think I'm doing it backwards. Let me go back.
You got finger happy.
Yeah.
All right. So looking more in depth at Evanston's model, what they did is they used a 3% tax that's collected on the sale of recreational cannabis. And the city adopted a reparations fund in which they pledged to distribute $10 million over 10 years. So again, we're looking at a model of what a city in the United States has already enacted, has already collectively started to push forward. So it's to say, where there's a will, there's a way, and this is one model. Another model that we'll take a look at is happening at the University of Michigan. In 2020, the Andrew Mellon Foundation contributed $5 million towards community-based organizations to help develop research-informed reparation plans. And there's a list of 8 to 9 colleges and universities that are working together collectively to make this happen within their local cities. And so this is to say that, again, it's another model that's happening, and that particular model is based on colleges and universities. And then we hop into what the Justice League model is. So our vision statement is this. The Justice League of Greater Lansing, Michigan has cemented our commitment to healing and becoming the beloved community by making the connection between faith and racial justice in the form of reparations. In the Greater Lansing area, reparations will be committed mainly from predominantly white houses of worship as part of their efforts to repair the breach caused by centuries of slavery, inequality of wealth accumulation, and the failure to live into God's plan of equality for all of humanity. So, to summarize, this is the Justice League model. Specifically, we are seeking to develop a network of predominantly white houses of worship from the Greater Lansing area to help create a reparations endowment fund to make amends for the historic wrongs perpetrated on the African American community. And how would we secure those funds? First, we would look at the endowments of churches and realizing that many churches, both directly and indirectly, benefited from the legacy of slavery. So we look to churches that say, hey, we're ready to put our faith where our action is, where our money is, and say, we're ready to take that next step. And we can do that from the large sums of money that our church has been sitting on for many, many years. Seeing that as a proactive way to help start the reparations endowment. So that's number one. Number two, it comes from individuals like yourselves through personal contributions. People can also write the Justice League into their estate planning. And we've been fortunate enough to actually have that happen already. And so that is another option of contributing to this vision. And then lastly, asset donation. That could be a home, that could be a vehicle, other assets that can be liquidated and contributed to the reparations endowment. So the three main areas that we'll be focusing on are housing loans. Hence, we go back to Willie's point talking about redlining. We know that home ownership is crucial for intergenerational wealth. And the fact that our government, realtors, mortgage companies have strategically prevented African Americans from purchasing homes worth value in areas that would help them build wealth is one reason why we want to start with housing. Secondly, scholarships and educations for African Americans who are attending accredited colleges or work training programs. And then lastly, it's helping to establish grants for African American owned startup businesses. So who will make these decisions? It's just not myself, and it's just not Willie. What we've focused on over the past year and a half is building an advisory council that's made up of African Americans from different community sectors in the Greater Lansing area, different professional backgrounds, different experiences, ranging from a retiree at Boardwater and Light to pastors, to local social activists that know the community, that love the community, and understands the community. So some focal points that we want you to keep in mind is that we are keeping our focus local. We started off talking about the legacy of slavery at the national level, and we realized that every part of this country has its own historical tie to slavery in one way or another, but we're focused on the Greater Lansing area and the 46,000 African Americans that reside in it. Remember, it's repair, not an investment with an expectation for personal return. It's not charity. And that's sometimes hard to break away from, especially with us living in this capitalistic society where for every dollar that we get, we want 10 to 20 cents back. But this is based on repairing the breach of systems that have caused the conditions. Our goal of 2023 is to reach $1 million. That's the goal for the organization. And it's to also land the concept of reparations and get some of those distributions made this year so that we can have that recognizable footprint in the community. We are very aware that we are, again, working with this broken concept. So we're working very diligently to make this happen, and we'll talk more about some of those supporters in just a moment. So these are the supporters. All the churches that are listed here haven't necessarily given monetarily. It could be leveraging their space to allow us to come in to disseminate information. But a large part of these churches either have contributed or they're in the process of developing a method to contribute some way, somehow. Willie and myself are part of Lansing First Presbyterian Church, located downtown Lansing. They actually celebrated 175 years this past year. So they've been around for quite a long time. And, the church has undergone a lot of transformation with being the first church to kind of take the plunge and contribute to the Justice League. Their pledge was in the amount of $100,000. There also was a pledge made recently by Hope First Presbyterian Church. And there's also a church by the name of Sycamore Creek that has pledged 1% of their church endowment over the next 3 years. Again, some other churches that are considering how their church would make the contribution includes Red Cedar Friends as well. So the support that we're getting from churches has been fantastic. It's so important that churches are doing the internal work. It makes a difference. It shows churches that have been doing the spiritual work, having the conversations, have the internal committees, because they're a little bit further than some other churches. And so we appreciate kind of knowing where our audience lies as we come into those spaces. For more information, you can go to our website, which we just recently completed. It's at www.justiceleagueglm.org, and you can email us directly with questions or comments or how you would like to get involved with the Justice League. And what I'll do is I will share my screen at this point, Willie, if you can just...
You want me to open the Justice League piece, or are you going to do something different?
Well, I will pull up the website. I'm going to navigate it. I have a few areas that I'm going to navigate specifically.
All
so
right.
Thank you. Let's see here. And you guys let me know when you can see the website on your screen. Just give me a thumbs up. All right, perfect. So this is the Justice League website. We have a team behind the scenes that have been working very diligently with Willie and with myself over the past year and a half to make this happen. So this is our main website. Our public relations committee helped to put together this graphic that has the tenets of what the Justice League represents, as well as our vision. And it's been great working together with that team. Just a few areas that I'll highlight on our website. Let's go up to our teams so that you can see our leadership team. And that consists of, I'll let this load here. Willie, who is the founder. Myself, I'm the current acting president. And then we have Ben Rumba, who is our treasurer, and Sally Campbell, who acts as our secretary. We mentioned earlier that we have an advisory council that's made up of African-American professionals in the Lansing area. And so let's go there. All right. So this is a list of our advisory council members. I'm not sure if some of the faces or some of the names ring a bell, but this is Tony Willis. He serves with LEAP in the economic development sector. This is Betty Sanford. She's been working, she's retired now, but worked in student affairs for the past 20 some odd years at MSU. This is Dr. Nakia Parker, who specializes in history at MSU. And then we go a little bit further down, there's Pastor Sean Holland and Bishop Duncan, who are pastors here in the city of Lansing. Oprah Drenal specializes in LGBTQ and gender differences at MSU. And Cheryl Smith is the retiree from Board and Water and Light that I referred to earlier. So again, our team is made up of some very dynamic people who bring a lot of experience to the Justice League. So we're not just doing this alone. Really briefly, we have some working committees that make up our team. So we have a finance committee that consists of 2 CPAs, people who have a long track record of record keeping and dealing with finances. And so we're very, very blessed to have them on our team, helping us streamline and make goals, realistic goals for our project. We have a resource development committee, which Kathy Four is actually on, as well as with Judy. That committee focuses on the outreach. So contacting churches to see if they're interested in having the Justice League come and share more about our project. And of course, the presentation that we've shared with you today. It's a very crucial committee for our organization. The Public Relations Committee focuses on the social media aspect, as well as the development of this website to keep the public informed about what we're doing, what presentations are coming up, and so forth. And then lastly, we have our Administration Committee that help with the foundational aspects of the Justice League, from the incorporation to creating the bylaws to the breakdown of the committees that we have today. And of course, you're able to join the work if you'd like to volunteer your time. You're welcome to attend a general team meeting just to kind of get some more information about the Justice League. We do progress reports and updates at every meeting, and we also talk more about what we have on the agenda. So just to be mindful of time, I'm going to quickly share this last page, which is our upcoming events page. And this is a great resource for both members of the Justice League and people in the public who are just curious about what's on the docket in the future. So each month we'll list when each committee meets, as well as our general team meeting. And then it also has presentations that that churches have requested us to come out and to talk with them. So for example, in April, we are going to speak with the Unity Spiritual Center of Lansing. And then later that month, well, the next day, we're presenting at Red Cedar Friends, who has been kind of with us since the beginning. And then later in the month, there was a presentation that was scheduled with United Methodist Church. So we keep this information here for people to just know what we're doing and what presentations that we'll be making. Okay. All right, so I am gonna stop sharing, and just being mindful about time, I want to thank everyone for hearing our presentation. For those who attended, if this is your second time attending, thank you. And I'll turn it back over to you, Liz, to direct from here.
Great. Thank you both so much. This is my third presentation, and every time I keep hearing and learning new things. Do we have a few moments just to open up some either dialogue or questions that folks might have in here in the presentation?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you can hear me. I was just wondering about individual people who might in the community who might be under, have some particular problems with health, or obviously I have someone in mind. Are they able to, if they live in Lansing, would they be able to apply for some kind of help?
You say like health issues?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're talking about African American recipients. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
An African American recipient who was incarcerated for 18 and a half years. She's been out about 20.
Yeah. Yeah, mass incarceration. Yeah. Well, health is tied directly to racism and tied directly to the public health crisis. Racism is a public health crisis. Health ties directly into that. So, what the Justice League seeks to do is make amends, make that repair. So, person falling into a category of needing housing, and generally that kind of sums it all up. Or needing a place, not necessarily buying a house, but needing a place to be or to stay or to be taken care of, certainly falls under that broad umbrella. So I think that our criteria will be where an individual can plug in, an individual whose ancestors were enslaved in the U.S. and they're members of this community. We have, through the proceeds that we're able to pull together, we have ways of helping. And I think that housing is a huge issue. Education is a huge issue. The three pillars that we look at, but it's not going to exclude folk who need help in other areas. I mean, if you're unhoused, I think is a better term than we've been using previously. But if you're unhoused, you would be right in the arms of the Justice League. And health becomes a huge part of that, and education becomes a huge part of that. So that we want to be, I think we would say we want to be a one-stop shop, but we don't want to be, and there will be restrictions. We don't want to say that we have the answer to everything. There may be restrictions. I mean, for instance, if we talked about if individuals were not, in fact, have ancestors who were enslaved in the U.S. I mean, that's very possible. Who are Black but may not have had an ancestry like that. So there are few restrictions, but I don't think anyone should be discouraged with being able to plug into help from the Justice League. So I would just say encourage anyone to come to our advisory council and make information available to the council.
Would it be appropriate to suggest this on my part to the person that I know this person, to come and speak to them now, or wait until you have more of a fund of money available?
I don't know. I'll ask Chris to weigh in on that, because I don't think.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, I would just say that the advisory council is actually on its third meeting, right? And so that council is in the early stages of helping to participate in developing the criteria as to how these funds would be allocated. But we also realize that Black people are not a monolith, right? And so you may not want to go to school. That might not be your trade. Buying a house may not be your focus either. And so there's going to be an aspect to what the council does, which means listening to the community, right? Listening to the community, creating platforms and opportunity from people from the city of Lansing to contribute to their overall decision-making. So that's really important. You know, the last thing we want is for people to feel like a decision is being made for them. We have to lay a blueprint and we have to start somewhere. And so we start in the three main categories that have made most Americans successful: access to home ownership, access to education, right, and business. So we look at that model, but we also say in the same breath that the final say and feedback based on the communities in which we're serving is going to be strongly considered, right? So we're in the early stages of doing that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, Prince and Willie. Thank you very much for your presentations. I mean, it's great, effort that you're putting in and great presentation. And I'm on board 110%. I think I have similar kind of questions about, Willie, when you mentioned like the U.S. government's efforts on kind of two stages of one, providing reparations to communities and reparations to individuals in terms of, interned individuals. And, how do we kind of think about that, think about best models of reparations to communities, reparations to individuals? That's kind of one question. And then the second question is, community members who aren't able as much to contribute financially, but may have skills or things that they want to contribute to lift up the community. How do we kind of do that in the most effective manner? Because I'm kind of in a little bit of the latter.
Well, it's a huge undertaking, right? And so needing support is just way up there in terms of how we will bring this to fruition, and needing support in all manners. So if there, for instance, I said that early on with just this, your congregation, for instance, Kathy has just been a tremendous support to us, and skills that she has. And so if individuals represent some particular skill or some particular expertise, that's very welcomed and very much needed. I mean, we can't do this in silos. We can't decide that we're going to exclude parts of the community that can help. And so as long as it's single-minded, I mean, as long as we are in the mode to understand that it's repair for the wrongs that have been done, repairing the breach, we can accept if it's not a monetary piece, we can accept someone who can, in fact, bring advice to, a financial advisor, for instance, might say, I can provide some support to folk who might need to understand how to invest money that might be received through, say, a Justice League piece, or I can guide a student into how to do an application if they want to go to college. So there are a myriad of ways that I think you could participate. Join one of the committees. That's really a huge infrastructure piece that is important to keeping the Justice League afloat, is that we need hands and minds and bodies to help us bring this to be a reality in the community, because there are just a lot of moving parts that need to be done. So if that's some particular skill, or there's some particular uh, directional, informational piece that you might be referring to or could provide, that all of that is welcome. We've been welcomed into like houses of worship. People, have not said, well, you need a place to have a meeting, come here. And that's very helpful. So they are, look at our website, look at where, and that will be continuously updated in terms of what we need. Next week there might be another item on there saying, we need folk to show up at the Capitol next week to help us give a message to the community. Or so there'll be opportunities for folk to participate in many, many ways.
Willie, if I
Yeah,
could add to that,
Yeah.
just answering, Brendan's question. When we zoom out and look at the Justice League, it's made up of so many different skill sets, right? And that's really what you need to build a strong group dynamic. You need people who specialize and think differently, see the world differently. And we have that. And we've been able to work with people and leverage that naturally. And I think, historically, our government hasn't created the opportunity for people like yourselves to participate in reparations, right? Not even create the opportunity. And so what's nice to realize is that people, when given the opportunity to do something, they will do it, right? It just has to be a window for it to happen. And so the response that the Justice League has gotten over the past year and a half is a demonstration that if given the opportunity, our city and other cities around the country are willing to help repair the breach. But we have to start somewhere. And so the Justice League is giving predominantly white houses of worship the opportunity to contribute towards repairing the breach. And so so far it's been, a lot of progress.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks very much. I have to go. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for coming.
Good questions. Any other questions or?
Well, I don't want to dominate, but how do we also break down this barrier of predominantly white houses of worship to bridge that gap, right? Yes, it's good if we can be houses of white worship and repair some of the damage, but how do we also work to repair the damage of relationships and neighborness and healing of those damaged relationships? And I come from a family that I grew up in Chicago, and my parents consciously raised us in the city to be of a more diverse background. I've always pursued that in my life, but still of a very damaged relationships. How do we repair those as faith communities and be leaders as white faith communities? Because obviously that's not on our black and brown brethren to repair those relationships. How do we as think about that differently and use this as the opportunity to say, we're not just going to contribute financially, but we're going to reach with our hands across the aisle, across the chasms to repair that and be a model for other communities.
May I? I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
I think this would be a great opportunity I'm going to shift the spotlight a little bit, but this would be a great opportunity for Brendan's peers to help respond to that question, because I think that's a really great question about what the community building aspect looks like, the spiritual transformation, the internal work, and what that looks like for the community in which you live in. So I'm going to throw that out there for the Martins, the Fours, or the Millers to kind of help out with.
Well, and before we do that, I think that's excellent, and I'm just be brief here. One of the things, I don't know, Brandon, how much you have seen about the apology that's been taken into the community, and apology from white Christians. That's essentially, there have been others coming in with that group. Or I should say, the apology was initiated by white Christians. The apology is being shared with non-denominational folk, even, but folk who are interested in making this step. Because Brandon, at the heart of what you say is so, I just want to say that because as soon as you said that, I thought the apology, because it's a very crucial step to say, I'm sorry. And this community is starting to do that. And it's really very gratifying. Black people have never received an apology from anyone. As I mentioned before, the Japanese the government apologized. The government that instituted and allowed slavery has not apologized for that. So there's been an apology. I don't know if you were at that apology or if you saw anything about it or heard anything about it. The Presbyterian Church issued it, and it's been being shared by this community and other communities as well, to have that apology be read to African Americans in the Lansing community, all over the country. And it really has what you just described, Brandon. It has the effect of bringing folk together, having folks say, I'm sorry, and then having the recipient say, I accept that apology. Now let's move on. Let's talk. Let's work together. Let's repair this breach. Let's close this racial wealth gap that's been created. And you put it so well, because we're not talking about anybody feeling guilty. We're not talking about blaming. We're talking about receiving the Holy Spirit. We're talking about receiving, accepting the responsibility of saying, I'm sorry, and then having the group come back and say, hey, wow, I've been waiting for that so long. I'm so excited. Let's join hands and do something together. And so I feel like that's what this community is doing, joining hands and doing something together. I mean, it's just powerful. It's palpable that we are able to go through this community and join hands with folk and have folk come to us and say, we're so happy that something like this is being started, because we don't like it. We don't like seeing the disparities in this country. We're the richest country in the world, and we want to do something about it. So that's so gratifying, this community saying that we want to do something about it. And that's what I hear you saying, Brandon. We want to join hands. We want to drop this facade of having to be polite to say, I have more than you, but I'm not supposed to talk about that. You don't have quite as much as I do, but don't blame me. I didn't do it. I wasn't around. My family didn't own slaves, and so we're dispensing with all that language, and we're starting with what we can do. And so that's I think at the heart of what you said.
I thank you for your testimony and your work on this issue. Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
There are just so many ways that we can try to bridge the gap, just focusing on the 3 areas that the League has singled out. For example, working in the legislature to look at what are the impediments that exist in law in all of these. The legislature just in this last December passed a law that makes it easier to remove these provisions in our deeds, which say you cannot sell to a Black American. But you look then at incarceration. There's a lot we can still do in the legislature, for example, to change the bail laws, which are going to be taken up this year, fortunately, because so many Black Americans and Black people in our own county are unjustly imprisoned. So, you know, we can do one by one, or we could try to change laws or raise money for them.
I think for me, yeah, I just want to say thank you, Brendan, because you voiced sort of like the question that has followed me across my lifetime, and I think will be my lifelong question of, you know, what do we do? And I've had different answers at different points in my life, sometimes depending on where I'm working, in the community I'm working in, or where I'm living, and so it's sometimes for me there's some internal work to do, or it's steeping myself in learning the history that I did not learn in school. Oftentimes it's if I find myself, you know, working in a predominantly white space, or living in a predominantly white community, it's seeking out the organizations that are Black led, and where there can be relationships that are built and bridges that are built, and really being intentional about cultivating, intentional with the work that I'm doing, sort of inside and outside the church. So it looks different at different times, and I think that is important, because it's for me, it's not it's like the unanswerable question, or the many answered question of I don't think for myself there's ever going to be a point where I'm like, well, all right, I've solved racism in my life, so I can check that off the list. But it's more like, in this moment, in this context, with, you know, all the different variables in my life of what am I called to do in this moment? What are the opportunities? What are the things that are bubbling up in my community? What do I need to seek out if they're not there in that moment? So it's the question I keep asking and evolving into. And it's one that I just really appreciate hearing voiced out loud. Because yeah.
I think the voices out loud is important, and I think goes directly, Brandon, to the concern you raised. If we have in mid-Michigan a group of scores of churches that are advocating very visibly for reparations, that's a very important part of a discussion that should be happening far beyond the churches and so on, but it gives credibility to that the issue and the justice of the issue. That is very important. I look at those figures that you talked about from Evanston, for example, where a city council voted 8-1 for a reparations program. It's important. And I gotta believe, although I don't know the details of that, I've gotta believe that there were organizations, churches, and others who were the primary advocates in that debate over that action. So that becomes very critical in terms of how do we get beyond the history that we've been talking about.
Brandon, was your hand back?
Oh, I'm just being a smart ass and saying, yes, I'm sure there's a lot of faith communities in Evanston who supported that. And Evanston didn't have anyone who voted for Donald Trump. At least not in mass, right? Like it's a liberal community. I grew up right on the southern boundary of Evanston, and yeah.
Like Evanston's approach to look outside the box, you know, to take taxes from the sale of cannabis
Right.
and turn that into reparations. I mean,
And that's what we should be doing. Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
yeah.
That's. And
Yeah,
do we have any data on Evanston, like how that's gone? How like any? I mean, probably way
Well,
too early.
well, no. What they did was it was really genius. What they did was the first um, the first allocations were. I mean, they designed it so that they would have allocations and have a discrete number and amount, and so that it turned out that they did individuals who were living in Evanston from 1916 to 1964. This was that, you know, so they'd have a win, 1964, and there had been a housing discrimination piece in Evanston. So Black people were denied housing and had housing problems. And so they got the individuals or their descendants from who had applied and who were denied. And each one of those individuals got $25,000. You know, that was like the first initiative. And you see, they've allocated a 10-year period where, you know, they would do reparations. So that was the first, and you know, that was the first attempt, and they did have some, you know, some folks not so happy about it, and some folks saying, yeah, you didn't do enough, or I didn't get one, you know, but they started and they made an impact of getting that done. So, you know, so then it moves on. There's another approach coming up in terms of who will be eligible for the next dispensing amount. So it's that, you know, I mean, this is uncharted territory. I mean, not that it hasn't been a discussion, but to actually put these pieces in place is new. Nobody's, you know, it hadn't been done. So they have a mall. I mean, there are other malls that are ongoing, you know, some of the churches,
And while we talk about
Harvard
redlining,
has done that.
do you see what's over my head?
Yeah, map.
Of Chicago.
Okay.
Evanston would be on the bottom here.
Yeah. I used to live in Chicago. I used to live in Chicago as well. So yeah, I know that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm from Uptown.
Yeah, I grew up a bit in part of my formative years were spent in Chicago. So I have a great affinity, great memories of living and loving that part of my life, living in Chicago. And so I always feel very close when someone says they grew up or they lived in it or they know it, I immediately feel a kinship to the individual because I know about growing up in Chicago.
The best kinship, my mother grew up in Austin, neighborhood in Chicago, and saw Martin Luther King, you know, march there in Chicago. And one of her, you know, she had a lot of formative experiences in Chicago, but one of them was she had a neighbor who was a real estate agent, and she went to her office, and she was shocked to see a map with literal red lines on it, right? And that these were neighborhoods where African Americans couldn't buy.
Yeah.
And like, you know, we use that phrase, but there's literal red lines on the map, and she was so shocked to see that.
Yeah.
And that was a number of like formative experiences that she communicated to me. But and I was shocked to learn that too, right? That it's not a phrase, there was literal lines on that.
Exactly. People were and the part that's heartbreaking is that you can that map looks pretty much the same today. You overlay it, the communities are the same. Yeah. The one that we showed in Lansing. I was showing that recently at a presentation, and someone talked about the areas in Lansing. You know, we point out that East Lansing didn't have Black home ownership until 1968 when they were forced with the fair housing. And this audience member pointed out, you know, the same thing was happening in Lansing. It's just that Lansing, you know, the entire town wasn't doing that. The entire city wasn't doing that. But the same thing happened in Lansing, you know, when 496 came through and disrupted the Black community there. There were areas that would not sell homes to Black people who had been displaced out of that corridor, and they were trying to buy houses in other parts of Lansing, and there were parts of Lansing that would not sell to Black people, and so it was a different kind of the same thing, you know, with the red line. It was like, well, I'll sell your house over here, or let's develop this area over here where Black people can live. You know, there's a community here where that was developed after 496, where Black people were encouraged to buy. You could buy new homes, but it was so, you know, encouraged to buy Churchill Downs. You know Churchill Downs. You could buy homes here, but don't come over here trying to buy homes. You know, so the pattern, unfortunately, goes on.
That's why
I
our
mean,
churches and our schools are segregated.
yeah. And, you know, and the other piece on that too is when, you know, like the 496 corridor and also, you know, when we talk about the Levittown piece, but the rise of suburbia, you know, that was huge. Suburban schools were all white, right? Inner city schools where the red lines were all Black, and that pattern has continued. So it's really, really very gratifying that, and this conversation is really great. And I encourage us to do this conversation with our friends and family and neighbors, because this conversation informs our success in this project, you know, because we understand that it is not any way to be vengeful. We understand it's not in any way to talk about guilt. We understand it's a way to, as you point out, Brandon, a way to heal our communities.
Yeah.
It's a way to heal, because you can heal when you do repent and say, and you know, Liz, you could chime on this better than I. When you do say, I'm sorry for what happened to you, and the recipient is so happy to hear that. You know, you don't walk by someone, step on their toe, and not turn back and say, excuse me, I'm sorry that happened, you know?
Mhm.
And so to have a whole multi-generational problem be ignored and expected everybody then is on equal footing is a mistake. And until we acknowledge that, and until we try to heal that, you know, we're still struggling, and we'll be struggling. But, you know, so that's why this conversation is so important, that we can acknowledge that we have work to do,
I would
and
also
that we can do it together.
Mhm.
I would also add to that, Willie, Brenda, I don't know how young or how old you are, but I'll be 33 this year. And what's nice about being in this unique spot on the Justice League is that this is an intergenerational, interracial project. So I'm constantly learning with every presentation that we do, and we've done close to 35, 36 presentations. There's always something that I learn because of the experience of the people who live through it. So the amount of wisdom that's on the team often helps to break through the fear of, you know, where do we go next, right? So there's so much wisdom, there's so much thought There's so much skill set that goes into this. And I really do rely on our team. You know, like when Willie says, Kathy, we appreciate you, is because Kathy puts a lot of brain power and is very supportive behind the scenes. So I got your email in the chat, so I'm going to add you to the email distribution. I would welcome you to come to a monthly team meeting. I always welcome people on that format first, just so you can kind of get a sense of where we've been, who's involved, kind of hear progress updates from our committees to see where you might want to be involved, and just kind of get a sense of what we're doing before you hop 2 feet in and not want to do it. I mean, it's not for everybody. There is some opposition, and we do get some furrowed brows and flushed red faces sometimes on presentation. So this work is not easy, but I think Willie would agree with me that the stars have aligned, and our timing in meeting and just the momentum that we've been on with churches and with community has been nothing short of the grace of God. So we're very happy to be here.
I super appreciate your testament, and thank you.
Absolutely, Brennan.
I want to thank all of you, because tonight was just a reminder. We had like 45 people packed in the community room a couple of weeks ago, and it was dynamic presentation, awesome. And we got like 1.5 questions and everyone was just like, yeah, that was great. And tonight's just a reminder of like, it's not always the size, but just the quality that our participants are bringing, and questions and dialogue can really enrich in the conversation. So I want to thank everyone who is here tonight. I know a few folks had to leave early, for just really rich quality of community building and kingdom building together. So thank you, Willie and Prince and Heidi for your parts of the presentation, and to Kathy and Judy for your some of your work behind the scenes to make this possible, and for Brennan and Billy for showing up with your full selves tonight. That is no small feat. And I want to thank folks who are watching the recording, and hope that people will find a way to connect and continue these conversations. In April, I think April 23rd, there's going to be another program at Edgewood where, as a community, we talk more about Edgewood's history. Because when we talk about redlining and some of the financial benefits that Edgewood has received from the practices of redlining in East Lansing, and where our church was founded, and the generational impact of that, we'll be beginning that discussion in April, and we'll do a similar format where we'll have one after church with lunch and childcare, and then we'll do an encore program a week or 2 later, so that we can catch as many people. And let's keep having these discussions. So thank you all, and I hope you have a good night.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you too, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for your
Thanks,
support.
Kathy, for setting all this up. That's nice.